Well, Pete Alonso may no longer be a New York Met, but they signed Jesse Winker. We'll talk about it.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. Want to find any of my work? Follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. You could also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. I'm trying to collect myself right now because the news of the day is that Pete Alonso is not going to be a New York Met anymore. And I don't know how to feel about that. Jesse Winker is. Jesse Winker's coming back, but what's going on here? So let me just break down the latest. The New York Mets have re-signed Jesse Winker, and Andy Martino comes out with the tweet. Let me pull up exactly what Andy Martino says, because it hit me like a ton of bricks, like I'm sure it might hit you as you're hearing me say this if you haven't seen it yet. But Andy Martino says the Mets have pivoted to plan B post Alonso. They now consider it the most likely outcome that Alonso will sign elsewhere. They add Winker and will add a reliever, possibly a top one. So plan B is Jesse Winker and maybe Tanner Scott. Like, that's maybe plan B. And they're ready to move on from Pete Alonso, which means first base is Mark Vientos. Third base is Brett Beatty right now with Ronnie Mauricio, Luis Angel Acuna. Maybe they re-sign Jose Iglesias, but at this moment, your opening day third baseman is Brett Beatty. You go to Fangraphs roster resource, who's the third baseman? It's Brett Beatty. And today, Fangraphs wrote an article about Brett Beatty and his surprising struggles in the big leagues, and it didn't paint an optimistic picture. I'll just leave it at that. So I really am struggling with this news because on the surface, the Mets signed Jesse Winker. Like, cool, great. We could talk about that. But this is a Pete Alonso story because these negotiations, it sort of felt this whole time like, all right, they'll come to a resolution. Yesterday, Mets are saying we need a decision. Today, Jesse Winker is announced. And then here comes Andy Martino with the report that the Mets are essentially planning to move on. Now, could this be an ultimate chess move by David Stearns, where he was talking to a brick wall and he got fed up? And you know what? If David Stearns has to stand up to Scott Boras in this way so he doesn't push the Mets around forever, then I'm okay with it. And it makes some sense. But Pete Alonso is the fallout here. And I just wonder how this news hits Pete Alonso. Is he seeing the tweet just like all of us? Has Scott Boras or somebody prepared him? Or is Pete Alonso, working out in Tampa right now thinking, what the heck just happened? I don't know. And we'll find these details out hopefully when all of this reaches a conclusion. But for a fan base that I've been polling throughout the offseason, who do you want back, Pete Alonso, or do you want to, at the beginning it was, do you want to sign Pete or Willie Adames? Do you want to sign Pete or Alex Bregman? The results are always coming back pro Pete. Now, granted, I don't know if it's pro Pete, based on getting paid $40 million a year. We have no idea what the ask has been from Scott Boras, how ridiculous it's been, how frustrating the negotiations have been. I am okay on some level with David Stearns standing up to Scott Boras, and ultimately in Stearns we trust. But with all of that said, if you are telling me next season your lineup has Brett Beatty, Jesse Winker, Jeff McNeil, and Francisco Alvarez as the bottom four, and then what would the top five be? You got Nimmo, Lindor, Soto, Vientos, and who am I even missing? I don't even know. But I guess Tyrone Taylor's got to be in there somewhere. That's a weak lineup. I mean, it's not weak. It's not weak. You had a good lineup last year, and you're replacing Pete Alonso with Juan Soto. But that alone is not the upgrade we thought this was going to be. And the starting rotation, I like what they've done. I think they have good depth. They did not get a standout pitcher that improved there. This is showing a lot of cojones from David Stearns that he trusts his process, he trusts his front office. And if this is the plan, if the plan is Jesse Winker, Tanner Scott, and it's not Alex Bregman as the plan B, it's not Anthony Santander as the plan B, it's not trading for even Nolan Arenado as an additional wrinkle. I don't love the Nolan Arenado idea. At the same time, who would I rather have as the opening day third baseman, Nolan Arenado or Brett Beatty? As much as I still do believe in Brett Beatty a little bit, I wouldn't put all of my hopes in third base in Brett Beatty, Ronnie Mauricio, Luis Angel Acuna. But at the same time, if they really do believe in those players, and maybe they believe in the guys beyond Beatty, Mauricio, Acuna, of course, there's Jet Williams. Even further down the system, you have Jesus Baez or Jacob Bremer, whoever it is. If they really believe that strongly that they are going to be better off at third base long term with staying internal, and at first base they're going to be great with Mark Vientos, then they might be proven right in what they're doing here. With that said, again, this upcoming season, if you got a DH platoon of Jesse Winker and Starling Marte and you're rolling out Beatty every day, I just don't know how much better this team got despite adding the best free agent on the market. And that's just a weird place to be in. I'm going to take a quick break, collect myself here, and then maybe I guess we try to talk about the Jesse Winker side of this instead of just focusing on Pete, but I don't know. So just one quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, theater events near you. And Game Time Picks is going to make it easier for you to get tickets for your favorite live events because Game Time Picks filters out the fluff and shows you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. You can also look at your seats before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. You have the all-in pricing feature, so you won't be surprised by fees when you go to check out. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube today for this stream, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Trying to get to 12,000 subscribers is our next goal. So I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. Jesse Winker's back. Under a different context, I would be thrilled with that news. I'm trying to see the exact contract again here, just because, again, a little frazzled. Pete Alonso might not be a Met anymore. All right. Joel Sherman reports Winker is guaranteed $7.5 million in the deal and can earn additional $1.5 million in incentives. So if it ends up being 1 year, $9 million for Jesse Winker, I mean, that's perfectly fine. I am comfortable with the DH platoon of Jesse Winker and Starling Marte in an absolute vacuum, because ultimately Starling Marte hits very well against left-handed pitching. Jesse Winker had a really good season last year. He's going to give you good at bat. He was great in the postseason, got on base more than half the time. Can't really complain about that. Does he have the most pop? No, he doesn't have the most pop, but he can hit 15 home runs depending on the playing time. You might be able to get 20 home runs between that platoon. They get on base at a good clip. Marte swipes some bags. You got depth in the outfield. Like, I like the idea of Jesse Winker being back, but here's the thing. That means you're probably not getting Anthony Santander. I want to make that part of this clear. That's the other side of it, right? Like, you tell me that the Mets are re-signing Pete Alonso. Well, I feel great about Jesse Winker as that second bat you're bringing in. But Anthony Santander, you can say, well, you can play him at first base. And technically they can. That might be the decision they make. But if we're following the tea leaves, which is every single time there's been a story that has been leaked that might have had some information from the Mets side, has been a continuation of saying that they trust their internal options at third base. That's the most likely alternative. That's what Andy Martino said. Most likely alternative now is the Mets are staying with their guys at third, and they're going to focus on their bullpen. Now, you better build a super bullpen. Don't make this move and not land Tanner Scott. Like that's got to be a linchpin in this. You land Tanner Scott, at least I feel a lot better about the bullpen, and maybe you get another arm on top of it. And if you really invest heavily on the bullpen and you say, all right, we're going to focus on pitching, we're going to focus on defense, and we have Juan Soto, I can eventually come around to this idea. I can. I'll talk myself into anything if I have enough time on it. And especially because David Stearns, he's an intelligent executive. And so once you get to his line of thinking, it's going to have some sense to it. So, yeah, let's just say that is what happens here. Let's say they get Tanner Scott and they bring back Ryan Stanek. And they have Edwin Diaz, Tanner Scott, Ryan Stanek, Daniel Nunez, Reed Garrett, Jose Budo in that bullpen. You have some combination of the long men, whether it's Griffin Canning, Tyler McGill, Paul Blackburn, whoever's in the rotation. They figure that out. We've already talked about the rotation a lot. It doesn't have the most frontline options to start the year. But if Sean Manaea is the guy who was at the end of the season, if Kodai Senga is the guy they had in 2023, the rotation would be pretty good. And you might get something that you didn't expect out of Clay Holmes, and Frankie Montas can bounce back, and David Peterson can build off of a strong year. Like I can understand where they're coming from with all of it. And if you really do build out that great bullpen, I feel as good as I can about the Mets pitching. I'd be like, all right, they're in a good spot. But when it comes to the lineup, you are expecting Juan Soto to really lift the rest of your team. And look, he just did that with the Yankees, right? But he had Aaron Judge as his partner in crime. And Francisco Lindor is coming off an MVP runner-up season. He's not Aaron Judge. You have those two guys, though. That's a good starting point. You hope Brandon Nimmo is better than he was last year. He did drive in 90, but everything else kind of down the board based on his career. If Nimmo's a little bit better, and if Mark Vientos is the guy he was last year, you do have the makings of a good lineup, and Alvarez can step up and be better. I like the DH platoon. The defense in center field would be great. Like you can understand how the team fits and all the pieces make sense. But at the end of the day, it's not as good as the team would have been with Pete Alonso on it. That's just the reality. That's just the reality, especially if you're not getting Santander or Alex Bregman. You know, I mean, maybe this is a long, winding road that lands with Bregman in a Mets uniform. I just don't think so. I don't. Right now, the pivot on Pete Alonso is he's going to go to Toronto potentially. The pivot on Bregman, he's going to go to Toronto potentially. Are they going to have both of those guys and Vladdy next season? Not necessarily likely. I don't think the Blue Jays are going to sign Pete and trade Vladdy. The report is if they sign Pete, they're going to keep them both. So you look at where the Mets are at, and there is still, I guess, a door cracked slightly open where Pete Alonso comes back. And I want to go back to Martino's tweet again because it doesn't completely shut the door. The Mets have pivoted to plan B post Alonso. They now consider it the most likely outcome that Alonso will sign elsewhere. If this is a game of chess, it could be a genius one. It could be. If this is a game of chess and Alonso ends up coming back, then all of a sudden it could be brilliant. But I really think the more that you sort of are reading into this, I imagine David Stearns was just done with Scott Boras. I don't know. It's an interesting tweet. Like I want to talk about Jesse Winker and the idea of Tanner Scott in the bullpen, like what this plan B supposedly is, but it's hard to even like remove the attention from Pete Alonso at all, because you're still talking about a homegrown Met who has hit more home runs, as far as a rate than most hitters ever in Major League Baseball history, but certainly the most in Mets history. A guy that if he got one more year was going to break the home run record. And now you're just saying he's gone. I don't know. This is a move that I would say this might be the move that most defines David Stearns and his tenure with the New York Mets, at least early on. I mean, he's got a long, long time with the Mets, and things, will evolve. There'll be other big decisions, and I still fully support the guy because what happened last year, there's two reasons why the Mets, well, three reasons, but two main reasons why the Mets turned that season around. Number one is Francisco Lindor. It all starts and ends there. But number two was just a really well-run front office, and David Stearns deserves a lot of the credit for that. But this is standing up to a franchise star. This is not giving in to what the fan base wanted at large. And this is Steve Cohen putting that power into David Stearns' hands and not crossing over. And it's a power move, man. It's a power move by David Stearns. I think that's where we're going to close the show. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. And right now, new customers can bet $5. You're going to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. It's not just the NFL action. You can look at NBA action right now. You also can look at MLB futures. Maybe you want to bet on Pete Alonso to win the AL MVP. We'll find out if that's where he signs in a little bit. But again, you can find all that over at FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And remember, you're going to get started with that $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, I'm going to try to take some questions if you guys have any. I'm going to do the best I can on that one because it's a little bit tough as we're trying to close out this show to figure it all out. But here we go. I mean, how does signing Winker concept being out Alonso just tuned in? So for those of you who did just tune in, I'm going to give you guys a recap. Andy Martino has reported that the Mets are basically out on Pete Alonso. Here is the tweet. The Mets have pivoted to plan B post Alonso. They now consider it the most likely outcome that Alonso will sign elsewhere. They add Winker and will add a reliever, possibly a top one. He follows it up by saying this is a similar approach to what the Yankees did post Soto, spreading the funds around on the roster. Here's the thing about that second tweet. Spreading the funds around the roster makes sense if you're the New York Yankees and it's Hal Steinbrenner and they don't want to go over that top luxury tax threshold, but that top luxury tax threshold was named after Steve Cohen. And if you could have signed Pete Alonso and he could opt out after 1 year, I'm sorry, I just can't completely buy into this idea of you have to spread the funds out across the roster. Like the Yankees have to do that. But you're telling me that signing Pete Alonso was stopping you from signing Tanner Scott? Why? Like it doesn't lie. And I guess here's what I'd say. Juan Soto was a Steve Cohen signing. Now, you can give David Stearns whatever credit you want to for being part of that process. But ultimately, Juan Soto, that was a Steve Cohen deal. Steve Cohen was hosting Juan Soto at his house. Steve Cohen and Alex Cohen sold the Soto family on the Mets' familial aspects. And, oh, yeah, he opened up the checkbook for $765 million that can vest to over $800 million. Like, that was a Steve Cohen signing. You can't give David Stearns the credit on that one. I'm not saying he got in the way or he wouldn't have done it, but that just is what it is. This negotiation was turned over to David Stearns, and that was intentional. Steve Cohen will come over the top rope for the top free agent on the board. But let it be known, Scott Boras, that you have to do business with my president of baseball operations. And Pete Alonso is the casualty in this process of Scott Boras probably being absolutely absurd, thinking that at some point the Mets would cave to the fan pressure. Steve Cohen would be the boss of David Stearns and say, no, listen, I want Pete. And the Mets wouldn't move on. And again, maybe this is the chess move. It does say most likely outcome that Alonso will sign elsewhere. Mets have pivoted to plan B. But if they had signed Anthony Santander, I would say that door is slammed shut. Another question I will do for a show tomorrow. If this is the news, I will actually devote a lot of time and do some research into Jesse Winker and Martez, the platoon, and talk about that side of it. It's just the Pete Alonso thing is pretty crazy right now. Again, though, if they had signed Santander, I think the door is shut on Pete Alonso. I like this. The door is still unlocked for Pete. Absolutely. If the Mets had 3 years, $75 million on the table this whole time, and Scott Boras calls up David Stearns and Steve Cohen and says, we'll actually take that deal, are the Mets going to say, nope, what we had deemed a good contract for you this whole time? No, we're not going to do it now. I like this one because I'm a Giants fan too. Pete is going to be to us what Barkley is to Giants fans. Yeah, that would suck. I'm sure there's a lot of Mets fans that are a fan of both. I don't think that Pete Alonso is necessarily going to set the rushing record, although Barkley didn't quite get there. And I don't know, like the ultimate move, and there's no team in the division that would do it. Like, yeah, there's just not a team in the division that would do it. Like, I'm thinking, could the Braves clear a spot for him? But they got DH locked in with Ozuna. And the Phillies, like, they got Schwarber at DH. They got Harper at first. So there is no pathway for him to screw the Mets in division. But, like, is there a world where Pete Alonso, I guess here's where it does come back to chess. Like, where is he going? If Pete Alonso's not coming back to the Mets, is he really going to Toronto? Maybe. And if he does go to Toronto, it would give them a plan B if Vladdy signs elsewhere, if Pete Alonso signs the 3-year opt-out deal. They can DH him. It could make some sense. Could I see a world where Pete Alonso hits 55 home runs this season for another team? Yeah, I think it'd be crazy for him to, because he hasn't been that since his rookie year. But could I see him having an absurd season if he lands in the right ballpark? Absolutely. I'd love it if some crazy team got in. Like, how about the Reds pony up? Because if I'm Pete Alonso, that would be a place I would go, just because Pete Alonso in Great American Small Park would hit 50. And that'd be a fun team. And I think, like, Pete Alonso could go have himself a lot of fun in a situation like that. Going to Toronto and playing with Vladdy and those guys, I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense for Pete. And the fact that the Blue Jays are also being attached to Bregman right now. Man, this feels like the ultimate Scott Boras fumble. It really does. Like, Scott Boras got the win on the Mets with the $765 million, and they just stuck it to him. They did, because, yeah, here we go. I've got a story written here. Is there anything different on SNY? I'm going to skim this real quick. Quarterly sources, it's the same thing. Expect Alonso will sign elsewhere. Crazy. I'm hoping that this is not really the end. But you never know. According to Mike Mayer, Mets have signed catcher Onyx Vega to a minor league deal. Cool. 742 OPS in the Puerto Rican Winter League. Depth. Yeah, I don't know if I have much else to talk about here on this situation. If you have any other questions, fire them at me real quick, and we'll close the show here. Yeah. Here's Will Salmon. Shortly before news of the Winker agreement, Will Salmon of The Athletic, we had written here, and there was a notes column by Will Salmon and Ken Rosenthal. We had written here the Mets were in active talks with their players, and it would be difficult to fit Alonso into their plans if they strike a deal in other pursuits, league sources said. So again, it could be chess. It could be chess. But it also could just be like, hey, we when we say something, Scott, we say something. If they had a line in the sand, take our offer or leave it, then you have to hold up on that. Is this what Soto envisioned? No protection. I don't know if it is. I always thought that Soto was sort of promised Pete Alonso. So I don't know how Juan Soto processes all of this. I really don't. Ryan, is there a chance this is Boras putting pressure for the Mets to give him more? No. No, it's the other way around. Boras put pressure this morning when he said that the Blue Jays were in, but I don't know. Could this be a smokescreen? I hope so. But I don't know. I don't think so. It could be. It could be a smokescreen from the Mets. It could be. Boras thought he would outlast Stern. It wasn't going to happen. They needed to make a decision if Pete wasn't coming back. Pete could still sign. The ball is still in his court. They're trying to take the ball out of his court. And now the onus, if you're Pete Alonso, because again, I feel for Pete in this, man, because my heart goes out to Pete. I started covering the New York Mets with this show 2019. So this has always been a Pete Alonso podcast. Like the first big story I got to cover was Jacob deGrom going back-to-back in the Cy Young that year in 2019 and Pete Alonso chasing down Judge. And so this has now been 6 seasons covering Pete Alonso in this podcast, more than 5 years. I'm looking literally at my wall over there, a Rookie of the Year plaque, Pete Alonso. It sucks, the idea of Pete Alonso not being a Met. I'm just going to say it. It just does. And if you are against Pete Alonso coming back, hey, you're entitled to that opinion, and you're going to get what you wish for. But if what you wish for is Brett Baty at third base to start the season, I feel like the same people that come in the comment section on YouTube and say, stop talking about Brett Baty are also the ones that are saying we're done with Pete Alonso. So how do you reconcile those two things now? And Pete Alonso makes this team better. It's just that simple. If you had the lineup and you have Juan Soto and Pete Alonso batting behind him, I think Pete Alonso is a shoo-in to get to at least 100 RBIs. I would think 40 home runs too, but 100 RBIs is as good is as low as I think it would be with how much Soto would be on base in front of him and how many balls Peach is going to run into. I mean, last year he was having a horrible season at times where just you could tell he wasn't right at the plate. And he still ran into 34 homers, and he was the guy in the playoffs along with Mark Vientos that carried them to Game 6 in the NLCS. Pete Alonso's playoff numbers were fantastic. 999 OPS. It was 5 home runs, and he had 5 home runs, and he walked 20% of the time. Pete was great in October. Quit joking, Ryan. This isn't funny. I wish I was joking. But again, this is either a big ploy, a last-ditch effort, and maybe today the Boras Pete Alonso side of this comes around in a dramatic way to the Mets direction, and these sides can come together. But you look at what is being reported out there, and the reports are telling us that the Mets are planning to move on. And I guess, I'm just repeating myself. I'm talking in circles, so I am going to close the show. But I would say at this point, if they're not going to re-sign Anthony Santander, or if they're not going to re-sign Pete and they aren't going to sign Anthony Santander, this lineup got it. I can't say it got worse because you got Juan Soto, but it didn't get significantly better. And we'll just see if the combination that they're putting together, where they're going to value defense a little bit over offense. Baty, Acuna, Mauricio at third base is better than Vientos, and I think they're maybe thinking Vientos could be better than Alonso. Center field is going to be a really good defensive spot. You got some issues in right field because Juan Soto's not the best defensively, but overall you're talking about a very good defensive team across the board with Juan Soto in the middle of your lineup. It's a better team than the one last year. It is. I'll come around and say that because Juan Soto is a significantly better player than Pete Alonso. But Pete Alonso and Juan Soto together made the Mets a team that I think was on the level of the Braves and the Phillies. And without Pete Alonso, I think it's definitely fair to assume that a lot of the national media, for whatever that's worth, are going to put the Mets third in this division to start the year. That's fine. They can win the division. David Stearns is just banking on his front office. And I hope that he's right. If the Mets front office is that good moving forward in the long term, this was a very pivotal moment for the New York Mets where David Stearns showed why he is one of, if not the best in the business, and it could be great in the long run. Short term, though, this hurts for Mets fans, and that's where we're going to leave it. I'm sure I'm going to be coming on doing a lot of shows as we continue to unpack the fallout of this. The Mets might sign Tanner Scott today, and I might be hopping on another live. So if you don't want to miss out on any of your Locked On Mets content, make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you're listening to the playback of this on the audio side of things, make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day, not for your second watch. Head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.